studies recently. I often will try to give a bit of a review, but you all were here, I think, last week, so I don't need to feel obligated to catch anybody up. We're going to start right where we left off, there in the middle of Daniel 8. We are in our study answering a question that was asked of me, perhaps, now it's been about a month ago. Where will the Antichrist come from? And this is something of a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle. I've gone through chapter 2 of Daniel, chapter 7, and then now we're in chapter 8, and we really won't get the final piece of the puzzle till we get to chapter 11. I've given you a map showing you where I think the answer is to be seen on a modern map of the Middle East, but I don't expect you to accept it just because I say so. I want to establish these points, point out these pieces of the puzzle step by step. We had gotten down to, well, let's start here around verse 8. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn, which we pointed out last week, represented Alexander the Great, was broken. For it came, and for it, in the place of that one horn, came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. What verse are you on?
8.
Did I make that clear?
8 and 8.
I get down here for the transparency, but go back up there for my text. In the place of the one, several years after the death of Alexander the Great, we see the number of generals that he had, which numbered over a dozen, I think, narrowed down to where we come to the fulfillment of this part of Scripture. And that empire, the Greek Empire, was divided then between a horn named Ptolemy, the P is silent, Ptolemy, which would be in Egypt, Seleucid, which would be Syria, and these empires were great in themselves, bigger than even what we know of those individual countries today, Lysimachus and Cassander. This is how it divided up. Woo. Let's see, that's not quite the map I'm looking for. Let's see, where is the map? I showed it to you last week, I think, so if I can't dig it up here quickly, here it is. I don't know if I don't know if you can see it that clearly, but this is the layout of the land, so to speak, as of 301 BC. The battle, after the Battle of Ipsus, decided this. The Seleucids got the larger chunk that extended well out toward India. You have Ptolemy down here in North Africa, which would include what we call Egypt today. And then you have here in western, what we call Western Turkey, and up in the area of what we call the Balkans, I would think, like Yugoslavia in that area, here under Lysimachus, and then the bulk of Greece, what we know as the nation of Greece today, called Macedonia, under the general by the name of Cassander. Now, in this chapter, chapter 8, we are not told out of which of these four horns the Antichrist is going to come. But there is a little horn that's going to come up out of one of those horns. And it won't be really until we get to the 11th chapter that we can determine precisely which that is. At the outset, on this map, where I put my pointer, I'm the absent-minded professor, but I can use my finger. Oh, there it is. All right. We dealt with this last week. Remember, I asked the question, there is going to be a conflict. It takes up much of chapter 11, and I'm not going to go into every detail of it here, that the king of the north, which we would call the Seleucid Empire or Syria, and the kingdom of the south under the Ptolemies, or we'd call it Egypt, are fighting back and forth for the possession of this little strip of land here. And you can see, if you can see it, that's the city of Jerusalem. And so, really throughout the rest of this book of Daniel, primarily chapter 11, the whole story takes place between these two nations. The king of the south, Egypt, and the king of the north, Syria. And we just basically forget about these over here. This is true to form when it comes to biblical prophecy. Throughout these prophecies, the concern of the prophet Daniel was what's going to be happening to Israel. And it isn't so much of trying to determine what's going to be happening worldwide, but what's happening in the world, how does that affect our nation? And so, but we again won't get to the details on that until we get over to chapter 11. But tonight, just right out of the Bible, we're going to spend most of our time here. It was interesting, last week I had a couple of individuals point out that it is the common interpretation on Daniel 8 that this little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes. As I've told you before, I don't think that is correct. I don't think that's valid. And I think as we study this chapter, you will see that that really is not what even this chapter is saying. Because at the beginning of the chapter, in chapter 8, you have the vision, and then you have in the last part of the chapter the angelic interpretation. And so we need to go on to that. But allow me, starting here in verse 9, I think this was read last week. I think we've covered this already. And out of one of them, out of those four horns of the Grecian Empire, came forth a little horn and waxed exceeding great. This individual was greater than Alexander the Great had been. Toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. Toward the south would be toward Egypt. Toward the east would be out toward what we would call today Iran, Afghanistan, and those eastern nations out toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. Let me go back with this map. For those who think that this is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, let me point out a problem with that interpretation. Okay. Antiochus Epiphanes really wasn't trying to get any farther east. He had inherited all of this land because that's the area that Alexander the Great had conquered. Yes. But whoever this little horn is going to start with a much smaller territory. And allow me, getting ahead of the story, this is not fair. But if I'm correct, and it will be determined by the time we get to the end of the study, that this is the basic area that we need to be looking for the Antichrist to arise from. Then his pushing toward the east, and then on down toward the south, and toward the pleasant land. You know, you can come by boats down to Egypt, but this is the land thing here, toward the pleasant land, and it was correctly identified last week that the pleasant land was Israel. Since Antiochus Epiphanes, I don't think fulfilled any conquest going out eastward, he didn't have to. He was always settled in that area to start with. But Egypt to the south, he was concerned about, and it just so happened poor Israel was right in his path. It was like no man's land. And so it says, toward the pleasant land, verse 10 of Daniel 8, and it, the little horn, waxed great even to the host of heaven. Now, this is speaking figuratively, even as we see in Revelation chapter 12, where it speaks about the dragon with his tail knocking a third of the stars to the ground. I do not believe that's referring to Satan taking with him a third of the angels back in some early conflict with God. We know there were a number of angels that sided with the devil. We don't know the percentage. And a lot of people try to use this to designate that. However, this is yet future. Both Daniel 8 and Revelation 12 is yet future. So I can't look to the past for fulfillment of it. It says, and cast down some of the host and the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. These are the leaders in Israel he's putting down. Ever notice what it says concerning the beast in Revelation? Not sure if it mentions him by beast by name here, but Revelation 11. I want to show you. It is so interesting when we compare Daniel to Revelation. Okay, it doesn't mention the beast right here in verse 2 of Daniel 11. The beast is not mentioned. Let's see. On down.
You're in Revelation 11 or Daniel 11?
No, I'm in Revelation. I know I lose you, don't I? I'm sorry. Yes, in verse 7, it talks about the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them. Remember, I have told you that the beast in Revelation actually represents three different things. It represents a demonic spirit that has been bound in the bottomless pit, that's going to be released to possess the human being, which we will eventually know and identify as the Antichrist, and cause this individual to think he is God. Convince him. He's going to believe it. He's going to believe it. And then there is so you have the demonic spirit that's released from the bottomless pit. You have the human being, the king, and then you have the kingdom. Because in Daniel chapter 7, talks about those four beasts. It interchangeably talks about them as being both kings and kingdoms. The term is used interchangeably. But notice here in Revelation chapter 11, it speaks here about not measuring the temple of God. Verse 1, and there was given me, John says, a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, rise, measure the temple of God and the altar, and them that worship therein. Do you sense any incongruity for this passage of Scripture? The book of Revelation, it is thought, and I believe this is basically conservative scholarship, hold this view, that the book of Revelation was written down toward the end of the first century, like AD 96, somewhere down that way. John, get up and measure the temple. But if I recall correctly, historically, the temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed. That's right. I like how when I he said, that's right. When I connected, wow, you're right. Yeah, the temple had been destroyed. So this is not talking about some historical temple. This is some future temple which is going to be constructed there in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. And I'm assuming, we're not told how it gets built, but I'm assuming that the individual who's going to become the Antichrist will have these powers of persuasion. And people are going to think, who can make war against him anyhow? And he will be able to get a temple built there in Jerusalem, having some form of a covenant treaty that he's made